Hey everybody, Timo here. This episode is part of the Gitcoin Climate Solutions series. Please head on over to gitcoin.basin.global, check out our grant for the round, and then click back to grants, and you will see all the awesome climate projects. There are 40 individual projects and 10 bundles. This Gitcoin Climate Round is funding $333,000 of matching funds to all these awesome climate projects. So please support them, and welcome to the episode. Good morning, everybody. Timo here with BASIN. Got another edition of Gitcoin Climate, Gitcoin Alpha Round going live here. And welcome John Ellison from ReFiDAO.
What's going on, Timo? Great to see you, man. How are you?
You're doing well, man. Yeah, it's snowy day here, snowy morning here in Colorado, but we're in a nice little week-long snow pattern, which is good. So
beautiful. I'm jealous, man. Gonna be home soon before we know it.
Cool. Yeah, next month. Yeah, next about a month, right? You'll be here in Denver.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to actually meet, man, in the flesh. Give you a big old bear hug.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping by. For those watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, you can drop comments in those two chats, or you can do it at basin.live, which is the Riverside studio. You can drop comments in. We're going to do John and ReFiDAO, and then we have Sage from Resci Network on, and then we have Ignacio from Endangered Tokens thereafter. Let's just go ahead and get going. John, it is Friday and it is Refi Friday. So it's actually one of the best things about these live programs we've been doing is the Twitter Spaces, right? It's just like a PFP and a image and a voice, but like here you see people face to face. So it's fun.
So cool.
That's been one of the best parts about doing this. So here we are, Refi Friday.
Man, loving it. Thanks for kicking off again. You were also, I think, the Refi Friday catalyst last time. You're like, we got to do this every Friday. Let's go. So thanks for haranguing the troops and bringing everybody together.
Cool. You guys are kicking butt in the Gitcoin round. Why don't you tell everyone about your proposal and what you have going with the common staff?
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you. And been super grateful for the support. And I feel like it's pretty even. There's a good distribution of donations going to a lot of the projects. I think the 40 projects are doing really well. There's a good top 10 contingent that are getting lots of volume of donations and good donation size. So I think it's a win for the Refi community for sure. Like the power of network effects, power of co-marketing. It feels like we're building a really strong alliance here and supporting each other in new ways. It's been great to see like the Solarpunk Guild come together and Guido, Earth-Based Soul, start to really hold these kind of smaller communities within a niche community to really strengthen the network. So that's just a high level comment, but I appreciate your kind words. Basically, top level for Refi Commons Incubator is we are looking to create local ReFiDAO nodes or local ReFiDAO chapters using the common stack framework. And so the idea is that what we're doing at ReFiDAO by gathering all of the founders at the intersection of impact and Web3 together and having relationships and conversation, and also working with the investors in the space and the kind of core collaborators and contributors, the L1s, the grant funders. This is a really cool ecosystem service that has been a benefit to the global movement. But in order for us to really realize a regenerative economy at scale, we need this also happening at the local level in the key startup ecosystems that already exist. You're talking San Francisco, New York City, Boston, London, Berlin, Miami, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Lisbon now on the Web3 side. There's loads of these cities where there's tons of founders, tons of investors, billions of dollars of capital being invested, academics, university, and also governments looking at the challenge of climate change and wondering, what do we do about this? And so the vision for the Common Stack Prize is that we want to allow communities who are already meeting on the ground, founders in the network to say, hey, we want to take lead on fostering a regenerative finance ecosystem here in our city. And we're willing to make a long-term commitment. We're asking founders to make a 7-year commitment towards realizing the vision of regeneration in their city. And if we have all of these different communities applying and proposing what regeneration looks like there, we can then invite the global community to vote. And we're going to do that. We're going to be inviting people in the community who've been core members, value line contributors to mint a soulbound token. We're going to be introducing reputation tokens from ReFiDAO, and we're going to have a competition, a prize for people to vote for who should be the first 3 Refi Commons all over the world. So that's a headline initiative. I can go deeper into what is a Refi Commons, how does it work, and also how does this roll up into the global ReFiDAO governance model. But yeah, this is what we're thinking.
Cool. So it's like nodes, like polycentric, like local nodes is what I would gather. Okay, cool. It reminds me of Steve Case, right? AOL might be a bad word, right? But AOL was one of the first, but Steve Case was a big impact investor. And he wrote a book a couple of years ago called Rise of the Rest. And basically he was on bus tours around the US to do other startup cities. So getting out of San Francisco and out of New York and out of Miami, like how can
super cool.
Yeah, someplace in Indiana, right? Or someplace in Oklahoma or Colorado be a startup city. So I love that model.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's actually quite a lot of academic literature about what makes an effective startup ecosystem. Brad Feld from Techstars and the Founders Group out of Boulder has written this thing called the Startup Community Way, which is a distillation of over 20 years of research and practice of building startup ecosystems in other cities. And so there is actually quite a unique formula. And that formula actually informed what we've done at ReFiDAO from the beginning, which is a founder-led startup community. And so there's some interesting kind of models and methods out there. And I think really the power is introducing Web3 and saying, okay, startup community, you now have a token which represents your vote in a treasury, which has sum of money that you can then deploy towards whatever is the highest capital expenditure towards impact, whether that's grants or events or investing in startups or building a bridge or buying land, whatever it is, you now have the tool to vote and really to begin to practice effective governance at a local level. Because this is new for everyone. Is like, how do you engage stakeholders? How do you create good models of governance? And I think if we can begin with small experiments at a local stage and begin to move this forward, I think we'll see a lot of new people coming into ReFi going, I now have an easy way to make a vote and have an impact in a publicly verifiable manner where I know my money's going to the greatest good locally on the ground.
Yeah, it's almost like the next iteration of crowdfunding or kickstarting or these campaigns, but with governance, with actually ownership and a say in what's happening.
Yeah, totally. And obviously it's limited in scope, but we're talking cities, we're talking startup ecosystems, we're talking regeneration, where it's not covering all the things. But I think there's an interesting experiment here that we want to run. And so I think over the long term, we would want to see 12 or 15 very strong local startup communities becoming ReFiDAO nodes or chapters, however you will, and seeing founders and investors come into the ReFi movement through those local nodes, seeing regular meetup events happen every month on the same day of the month, seeing a coordinated kind of global symphony of regeneration using the most powerful tools of our time. And so that's really like the long-term vision here.
Cool. It's interesting you bring up Brad Feld. He's here in Colorado, and he posted a couple weeks ago this "I don't hate crypto" post. I've literally shared it like every day for the last week. That quote at the very end, I just dropped it in the chat. It says, I regularly here to be patient. It's not like the internet. It's like the internet was in 1999, ahead of its time. The builders are building and it'll take over in the future.
Yes.
I think he's going to regret saying that, but I feel like Web3 and ReFi and blockchain and everything we're working on I think he's right. So I'm going to cast that vote.
Interesting. You think he'll regret saying that?
I'm posting it so much that I'm going to just bring it up. Anytime Jeremy from the Open Forest Protocol yesterday was mentioning about investors having an issue with distributed ledger technology or blockchain or
really?
Like
Wrong investors.
Yeah. Over the last, especially the fall, FTX and SBF, and it's like blockchain bad, crypto bad, Web3 bad. So like, how do we tell that story? It's a tool. So that quote to me is, hey, look, here's one of the biggest investors, his former partner in New York City, I think Fred Wilson, same thing,
Fred Wilson.
Blogging about crypto and Web3 and cap rates and refi and carbon. And I think we're early and it's super exciting. Explain the tweet that you sent out earlier today about like your thesis on VCs and refi and why you think they're early.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll share my screen here for those watching just to provide some context. So I was on the train into Lisbon, reading through email inbox and noticed from Stonks, this like online crypto pitching platform, this chart, which shows the percentage change in startups raised by vertical. This is a delta. It's like a change in capital going, and a lot of money is going into climate. A lot of money is going into crypto, but also into social. And yes, they're still in SaaS and there's all this other kind of lesser change. But my thesis is basically that climate and environmental markets are growing at an alarming rate. They're already multi-billion-dollar markets and they're growing exponentially. And as these markets become more efficient, they're going to be digitized because this is the path forward for everything. And in the same way that Mark Andreessen popularized like where's eating the world, yes, it's happening here in climate and environmental assets. But the real question is, can software both eat the world and help save it? Because what happened in the era is that it ate the world and created extractive business models rooted upon largely attention harvesting and data aggregation. And it's had some really negative second order and third order consequences for society as a whole, I would argue. And so I think this is a really pivotal moment for the refi space, not only to disrupt entire industries, but to do it in a way that is actually regenerative, both in the culture and the companies we make, and also in the societal impacts of the assets that we create and the way that we promote these markets as a whole.
Cool. I know it's been covered elsewhere, but what have you settled on for your definition today of refi? What is regenerative finance to you?
Yeah, I think the simplest term is it's a movement of people who are exploring how to use the best tools of our time to redesign money and heal the earth. And so I think thinking of it as a movement, this is a social movement, but it's also a technological movement. And it's recognized that money actually is one of the highest points of leverage. Money itself is a technology. And if we can redesign this technology to heal the earth and to restore our relationship to it, then we have a much more prosperous and sustainable future in the years to come. So you can take it in a number of other directions, decoupling decentralized finance with regenerative economics. So there's multiple layers to it, but I think at the heart, it's trying to redesign money to heal the earth.
Cool. I go back to biomimicry in like ecosystems of in the interspecies money post, Jonathan Wigard, he mentions, I'll find the text here in a minute, but he basically references groups of people that are getting like signals, right? Like mycelium network or from the ecosystems, from nature, collaborate, cooperate, coordinate. And I can't help but think that these nodes, right, whether it be ReFiDAO nodes or BASIN nodes or Regen network, whoever, they're communicating, they're iterating and they're collaborating and they're competing, just like that happens in nature, but it's still like symbiosis. Like it's still like moved like the whole, like that. There's been some criticism on the Gitcoin stuff of just a bunch of people competing for resources. That's nature, but it's a collaboration to compete for those resources. And that's just, I think we're acting more like nature as the point. I feel like there's some signals coming, and I feel like this technology that you mentioned is like part of that nature coming into humans.
Yeah, totally. And I think taking signals from nature and recognizing the patterns of when nature grows symbiotically and when certain species can become invasive. But there are interesting models and interesting signs here. And I think there is this consistent collaboration dilemma, which is, do you defect or do you collaborate? And those incentives are always there, like regardless of whether there's natural capital assets or fossil fuel backed assets, like these incentives are the incentives of the game. And so I think it's really interesting to see the refi space balance collaborating, supporting each other, and also this, hey, winner take all, I want to dominate kind of energy, because I think it's very human in our nature. So yeah, I think it'll be a timeless dilemma that we always revisit again and again.
Over my thinking with refi and regenerative finance is like abundance, right? If anyone read Peter Diamandis's book, Abundance, I recommend Bold. I feel like regenerative finance is like creating a world of abundance, that there's enough for everyone. If money, right, or natural resources are regenerative, then we live in an abundant world. That's what it settles for me.
Yeah. And I think abundance is also an expression, also an experience, like a human experience, that you have enough. And that sometimes, that experience is hard to find in modern society. A lot of our culture tells us we don't have enough. And actually, the business models are leveraging our dopamine receptors to constantly tell us we don't have enough, and that they have the thing that we can buy, which will give us just enough till the next hit. And whether that's cars or fashion or food or alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever it is, it's got this endless cycle. And at the heart of the regenerative finance movement is also, I think, a spiritual and conscious evolution that recognizes, actually, if you reframe this and really look at what the science says about what humans need to be well and to thrive, those things don't make us happy long term. Money beyond a certain threshold can be corrosive to a person's quality of life. And once you have your basic needs met, it's relationships. It's about how deep and meaningful relationships with people do you have? And what is your day like? What are your cortisol levels? How much time do you spend in nature? And like long-term Harvard study of people on their deathbed looking back, the number one most regret is that people worked too much and didn't spend enough time with their loved ones. And so I think abundance is also rooted in this like conscious experiment of what it is to be human. And so I think the more and more the refi movement can cultivate this awareness of abundance and propagate that into the products we build and the communities we create, the more effective we'll be at this big task of trying to address climate change, biodiversity collapse, injustice. Like, it requires a different headspace as well as a different heart space.
Love that. Yeah. So we have a really good question from Jan here. And I think the lead in is that ReFiDAO has worked with a bunch of founders. And then you're also working, you're going to be working with investors, and you're also going to be working with community members. So if you want to maybe frame that question about investors in the context of what you've learned with ReFiDAO.
Yeah. And are you talking this question specifically of investors willing to cap their returns? Is that right? Or do you want me to just frame the ecosystem more broadly?
Just in general, you can answer that question or just your thoughts. What comes up on that?
Yeah. Appreciate the question, Jan. And it's something that Magenta from Bloom Network has also been advocating for, and we've had a number of discussions about. And the concept of capped returns isn't one that I have seen in the refi investor circles to date. So we have a kind of pretty loose and open relationship with about 28 VCs who are actually deploying capital on refi. And we just try and help wherever we can, connect the dots, connect with deal flow. We have a submit pitch page on our websites, and founders who are raising can submit their pitch decks. And then investors can reach out or ask us for an intro. But this idea around capped returns, I think, is really a part of the LP agreement as somebody raises a fund. And so far, I'm not aware of any refi investors who've gone out and raised a fund with a capped return kind of structure to say, hey, we're limiting our returns for our LPs at 4 to 5x. And so I think this is an interesting idea, but also one that I would say I have less understanding of, because I think the underlying premise is the question is so that successful ventures can capture more upsides and that can be channeled to the protocol and communities. This is an interesting piece because if you look at the cap table of the average Web3 project, a large portion is going to community, and you've got like 10 to 20% for a founding team, 10 to 20% for investors. But actually having an organizational model that gives a lot of space to the community is what we have now, like a culture precedent Web3. It's very different than like a Web2 cap table. And so I would challenge and question, do you want to cap returns as a cultural precedent for a movement? Or do you want to demonstrate these are massive outsized returns, attract as much capital as you can, scale successful ventures that exit to community effectively? So that would be my question, is what's the most effective way to attract the best amount of capital, value aligned, and distribute that capital when ventures are successful accordingly?
Yeah, what comes to mind there is progressive decentralization, right? At the end of the day, if there's a core group of team and investors who are building the thing, but then you can exit to community where there's not an outsized influence of any, whether it be you or me or a certain group or a certain investor. It's like, how do you progressively decentralize into a community-owned asset? And governance. And something we talk about a lot in LexDAO is like the arbitration and dispute resolution. And Aragon has worked on that with the court system. And that's going to be a thing, right? Of like people like, hey, fighting over resources. So it's like, I don't think we can ignore that kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's the thing that the refi community should be preparing for in this bear market. Because I've had in the last 9 months between ReFi Podcast, ReFiDAO, and ReFi Spring, a number of projects either directly involved or indirectly where somebody says they're going to do a thing, charges a bunch of money, gets paid, and then doesn't do the thing and doesn't give the money back. And this kind of dynamic of how do you arbitrate and how do you decide, I think is actually a really important thing for the space. And we have to, yes, build like a solar punk future, but also recognize we live in a space that has bad actors. And to see the whole picture and not just be like persistently optimistic and missing out the other side of the equation.
Cool. John, you've been influential in the space of refi with the podcast and the ReFiDAO and ReFi Spring and everything you're doing. Are there questions from the audience that we're live on YouTube? We're live on LinkedIn. Jan posted a good question. Monty just shared the invest pitch deck. You can submit there. So I just want to offer things up for the audience if they want to ask John. You have his attention for a few more minutes before he's got another full day of ReFi Friday coin shilling to do, I think. And it's getting late there.
Yeah, I would love also to look at if you can send me the YouTube stream. I can see the LinkedIn one, but yeah, I would love to check out the YouTube stream as well.
Cool. I'll drop that here in the chat.
Cool, bro. And yeah, as we're in a kind of pause period, what about you, man? What's the latest with BASIN DAO? What's happening?
Yeah, things are moving along with BASIN. We're building our beta app, which we're working at solving primarily the biodiversity crisis, and carbon is part of that. Natural capital is part of that. And as real estate, under all of it for me, with my career and 20 years in investment real estate, habitat is real estate. If you can look at, there's a really cool website, a project that was featured in the New York Times called Map of Life. And you hear a lot about the IUCN Red List of species and endangered species. But Map of Life is actually tracking habitat as like an indicator of, we don't have to wait until the species are threatened or endangered or extinct. We can look at their habitat, and if their habitat is shrinking, then we know where we need to invest. And for us, habitat is real estate is habitat, and using the as I say, driving agnostic and indifferent capital into climate, carbon, nature. So we're working at structuring these deals, basically building a treasury of how you actually sell. If someone's going to buy a office building or a multifamily building or an industrial building, why wouldn't they buy a forest? Why wouldn't they buy a wetland? Why wouldn't they buy habitat?
Cool.
So that's the core of what we're doing. It's messy. It's convoluted. There's over 1 million species that are known. So we have a lot of work to do.
But it's an amazing opportunity. I think this is something that my wife and I are facing right now. Is we have a property in the UK that's generating income, and she basically wants to sell the property and buy a plot of land that we could never build on. And it's just got beautiful, thriving, mainly flora, but some fauna, and just a place basically to enjoy with the kids, interact with other homeschooling communities. And it's that kind of thing where it's like, if preservation of that land produces an income and a yield, then the kind of dynamics start to change. And I think like at the simplest level, if we can start to acquire land and preserve them and have easy income streams that are as reliable as somebody's rent or something like that, then like the whole societal structure begins to change. And so I think the top level of what you guys are doing, if that income stream is possible, there's something really powerful on the other side.
And that's exactly it, John. Is like my clients over the last 20 years, they're buying real estate, right? In a building, but they're really buying the income stream, and they're buying the security of that income stream. They're buying the low risk of that income stream. They're buying some tax benefits. They're buying some prestige, some legacy that comes along with that, and owning that, the flexibility of appreciation and be able to sell that. So that's what we're trying to do. If someone was comparing versus an apartment building or industrial building, like why wouldn't they choose a forest? Or why wouldn't they choose a beautiful, pristine floodplain or wetland or a very rich ecosystem that sequesters carbon? So that's,
assuming capital gains are similar projections, like it's the income equation. So love what you guys are doing and excited to get more involved. I didn't know if there are any other questions from the community or we should riff for the last few minutes, but there's lots of stuff that we can go into for sure.
Yeah, I think Sage is going to pop on here in a minute from ReSci Network. They have a grant, her and Ned, the DeSci, ReSci community.
Totally. Yeah.
What would be the ask for those following you in your work with ReFiDAO and Common Stacks? What do you want to see them do? Do you want them to start local nodes? Do you want them to get involved somewhere at top level or do the startup founder circle? What do you need most?
I think the main ask is to support our Gitcoin grant. So you've obviously added that grant here in the chat, but I think we need to raise, we're the target of 100K. We won't get there for this round, but we really do need 75K in earnest, kick off the ReFi Commons prize and commit to that whole timeline. And so every donation counts on the Gitcoin grant. All of that money goes to the Common Stack team and their process. We're also developing open source software, improving what they're doing, looking to make it more mobile first and accessible. There's a lot of work that's going into this that we're also looking for external grant funding. So if you like the idea of local startup communities, we'd love your support now. That's the single ask. And then if we raise enough money, we would love to kick this off and invite everybody who wants to be a part of it to join. We won't run founder circles this quarter, but we are looking at refactoring the whole program into a founders guild led by founders. So Daryl and I are trying to take another step back and allow founders to really shape the culture of the guild within the community, and dropping a little bit of alpha here that we are also, have verbal commits from 3 investors to be able to write checks at the earliest stage for a founder's journey in ReFi and pair them not only with investment money, their first check and a pre-seed, but also with a world-class product design and studio to really help their journey be the most successful possible. So that's really exciting. And we're building an open source curriculum to be able to structure the venture studio. And that curriculum would be open to all the members of the community. The Founders Guild, Community Manager Guilds, any other guilds that form will have this kind of core Web3 climate curriculum that people can go through. And it makes it a little easier to have those weekly meetings because there's a weekly piece of material that you can look at. Not too dissimilar to what Kernel's done, but it's very different in like the topic and structure is how do you build a business in this space? How do you be successful? What do you need to know?
Yeah, I think it takes a certain investor to understand the complexity. Investors obviously are smart, right? But climate and nature and biodiversity is complex. You distill that down. If you have support like you're talking about with storytelling, marketing, and a curriculum to help distill that message down, I think that's key.
Totally, man. Absolutely. Hey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to you, Timo, and your team at BASIN DAO for putting this together. I love BASIN Live. we're totally going to take one from your song sheet and do some of these on ReFi Pod. And yeah, call out to all the regions out there actively participating in Gitcoin. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Timo.
Cool. Thanks, John. Keep up the good work. Appreciate it. And we'll see you on the interwebs.
Kate's man. Ciao.
See ya. Make sure to add it to your final ballot. Please make a donation to every single one. It doesn't matter how big or how small it is. It's more about the number of votes and the number of donations that counts, because that's what engages quadratic funding. This Gitcoin Climate Round is funding $333,000 of matching funds to all these awesome climate projects. So please support them.